We're going to go through quarterbacks, tight ends, and defenses. Make sure you're ready for week 8. Starting at quarterback, we are going to have Lamar, Allen, Hurts, tier 1. Honestly, Lamar should be in his own tier. I mean, if you're looking at Lamar Jackson, he is not only the quarterback 1 in fantasy, but he has scored more fantasy points than any other player all season. Not even remotely close either. I mean, just going through and looking at this. 25, 17, 25, 23, 33, 19, 34. The man gives you such a high floor based off his rushing usage. The ceiling is insane. You have 12 passing touchdowns over the past 4 weeks. He's clearly the best asset at the quarterback position. Josh Allen at 2, you're going up against Seattle. Should be a very high-scoring game. Josh Allen's been the QB4 so far this season, but now that you add in Amari Cooper, I personally expect that the passing offense here is probably going to remain a little bit more consistent going into the future, where we had seen a really low floor from Josh Allen so far this season with 2 games fewer than 10 fantasy points. Jalen Hurts as our next option. He gets there with the rushing touchdowns last week. Obviously, the passing volume's not there, but that's because they just absolutely blew out the New York Giants. In this game in particular against the Cincinnati Bengals, my base level assumption is, okay, they're going to have to go out there and they're going to have to throw the ball a ton. This should be the highest scoring game of the week. But you actually do only have an applied team total of 22.5 points here for Philly. And if you look at Underdog, he's only higher, lower, 220.5 passing yards, so nothing crazy. Now, going down to our next tier, we're going to be looking at Jordan Love. Jordan Love, you have an implied team total that puts him up as the second highest scoring offense in the NFL this week, according to Sportsbooks. I'm going through and looking at the passing volume that you should expect. I mean, over the past month here, we have seen a total of 13. Yes, 13 passing touchdowns. Now, also, you've had these 7 interceptions. So Love is kind of that DGAF quarterback, but if you're playing in a league where you're getting 4 points a passing touchdown and only minus 2 points in interception, it's great. It's even better in a 6-point passing touchdown league. Obviously, Love doesn't have a ton of rushing upside, but this is about the best matchup you could ask for going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars, where they just made this New England Patriots offense look very good. Joe Burrow will be our next quarterback. If you are looking at Joe Burrow, you're going up against the Eagles. You are about 2.5 point favorites. Right now, if you're looking at Underdog pick'ems, they actually have Joe Burrow ahead of Jordan Love, both with the passing yards projection as well as the rushing yards projection, sitting here with higher, lower 12.5 rushing yards for Burrow. But to be honest with you, I wouldn't mind going with the lower than 12.5 rushing yards for Burrow this week. Whereas if you're looking at what we've had from Burrow this season, week 1, 15 rushing yards, but then afterwards, 9, 4, 10, 1, then 55 this past week, -3 rushing yards. So the rushing production, not particularly there. That is why it's one of my favorite picks on Underdog this week. And obviously, if you are not already on Underdog Fantasy, you can find that link in the description as well as the comment section. And if you use promo code FLOCK on Underdog, you're going to be getting 2 free picks. One, a free Malik Neighbors pick, more than less than half a total yard, which should be there for all code FLOCK users, whether you signed up today, yesterday, tomorrow, or 3 years ago with code FLOCK. And you should be getting an additional Matthew Stafford free pick, more than less than half a total yard for the game tonight. And on top of it, you're going to be getting a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000 and a free team review that we're doing in the live stream every night, available in damn near every state. Make sure you're taking advantage of it. Now, moving over to our next quarterback, we are going to be looking at Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray is killing Marvin Harrison Jr. here. I mean, Harrison has not been able to do much, primarily because there's been no passing volume in this offense. So far, you are looking at 3 games with over 200 passing yards for Kyler Murray, whereas we have, I want to say, 4 games under 200 passing yards, 0 games with 300 or more passing yards. I mean, you only have 1 game with more than 1 passing touchdown. The passing volume's been very bad. I mean, I don't think anybody can shy away from that. Also, at the same time, Miami is just simply not allowed opposing quarterbacks to score points in fantasy. A lot of that has to do with no Tua. You don't have to throw the ball aggressively against this Miami defense. But I mean, here what's saving Kyler Murray is the rushing upside. I mean, so far this season, you're actually sitting with 5 games with 45 or more rushing yards. Obviously, the rushing touchdown this past week makes it where even when Kyler Murray disappoints from a real life perspective, in fantasy football, he can be viable. Now, going over to CJ Stroud, I completely understand that CJ Stroud looks like a gross ranking to have him up here at 7 after the man last week had 86 passing yards. And at the same time, we can't excuse this away the way that you can with Kyler Murray saying, oh, trust me, Stroud's going to run the ball. We know Stroud's not going to run it. If you go through, we've seen some of these horrendous performances from Stroud this year. You go back to week 3 in that game against the Minnesota Vikings, where, I mean, you're looking at 215 passing yards, 1 passing touchdown to 2 interceptions. This past week against the Packers, it was garbage. And what we had back in week 1 against the Indianapolis Colts was over 30 carries for Joe Mixon, where this team was just wanting to run the ball over and over and over again. And that very reasonably could be the expectation that you have this go around. But what I'm looking at is I'm looking at a game that has an extremely high over-under. Sportsbooks putting out the Houston Texans as a top 5 offense in the NFL this week. Going through and looking at the underdog picks, they have CJ Stroud at about higher, lower 240.5 passing yards. So you could make an argument to have Stroud behind Sam Darnold, where Darnold has been a more consistent option in fantasy so far this year. I mean, I guess you can make the argument the game against the Jets, you have pretty much nothing. You get the 5.26 fantasy points. But here against the Los Angeles Rams, you actually have the Minnesota Vikings favored by about 3.5 points. There's an outside chance Hawkinson may be good to go. I just don't know at the time of this recording, but I do know you have Jefferson, you have Addison. This has been a very consistent team, and this should be a high-scoring game against the Rams, at least according to sportsbooks at the moment. Going over to our next tier, we're going to be led off with Jared Goff. Goff's been extremely consistent so far this season. I mean, you're looking at 2 games over 20 fantasy points, 0 games with fewer than 10. Obviously, the issue with Goff is very similar to what you have with somebody like Stroud in that this is a spot in which you should expect that the Detroit Lions score a ton of points. At least that's what sportsbooks are currently saying. But at the same time, they're probably going to look to run the ball over and over and over again. The higher lower on Goff is only 233.5 passing yards. Geno Smith will be our next QB. With Geno, I would have him higher than Stroud, Goff, Darnold in some environments here, especially where we are expecting that you have a ridiculous amount of dropbacks here against the Buffalo Bills, where the Bills are favored. We've seen in the past that if you end up getting this team trailing here in Seattle, they are willing to completely abandon the run. The issue is I'm expecting to have no DK Metcalf in this game, which makes me a little less excited about Geno. Caleb Williams will be our next guy. If you are looking at Caleb, he is 100% trending in the right direction. I think he's the top 12 quarterback this week and rest of season. He almost had 30 points in the London game against Jacksonville coming out of the bye. You hopefully get some more progression for Rome Odunze. You have Keenan Allen fully healthy. You have DJ Moore. You have Cole Kmet. I mean, Caleb Williams has been a completely different quarterback over the past month in comparison to what he was the first 2 weeks, which is natural to assume that rookies are going to continue to progress. And it's an okay matchup going up against Washington. Now, we're going to put Mahomes here at 12. I honestly want to have Mahomes higher than this. Now, I'm going to assume that DeAndre Hopkins doesn't have a big role this first weekend. Obviously, rest of season, maybe Hopkins comes in and really helps this passing offense here. Mahomes coming off a game with 154 passing yards, 2 interceptions, 0 touchdowns. And Mahomes has thrown an interception in every single game so far this season. You are looking at a total of 8 interceptions for Patrick Mahomes in comparison to only 6 passing touchdowns, 7 total touchdowns. It's absurd. He hasn't cracked 20 fantasy points in a single game. He's been a horrendous fantasy asset. And with that being said, you're going up against the Raiders. Sportsbooks are putting you as a top 5 offense. He may run the ball some. He had 39 rushing yards in the rushing touchdown last week. So, I would start Mahomes before I would start Baker. Now, I understand people are going to be screaming at me for the right reason to rank Baker Mayfield this low. If you go through and look at what Baker Mayfield has done so far this season, if you were drafting on Underdog and you needed a late quarterback and you took Baker Mayfield, it was the best quarterback pick in all of drafts. This was somebody getting drafted as a QB2 in those Underdog drafts. And your regular redraft league, you probably picked him up off the waiver wire. And he was the second, and I repeat, second highest scoring player in fantasy football through the first 7 weeks. Incredible. Immaculate, superb. I don't know how many words we can put here. He's even running the ball as well. We've never seen Baker Mayfield rush the ball this often in his NFL career. The man over the past month is sitting here with 12 passing touchdowns. Through the course of the entire season, he has 18 passing touchdowns in 7 weeks played. 20 total touchdowns. He's averaging almost 3 touchdowns a game. It's all been beautiful. The matchup against Atlanta, I think, is fine too. I'm not super worried about the matchup. It's all about you going from Chris Godwin and Mike Evans as your top 2 options, now to Jalen McMillan and Sterling Shepard. So I want to give Baker Mayfield his flowers. He deserves them. He's been phenomenal. I just think it will be much tougher for him in the future. Brock Purdy will be our next guy. Brock Purdy has also been great. Brock Purdy is the 8th quarterback in fantasy football so far. He's giving you a very high floor every single week. Back-to-back weeks here with over 20 fantasy points. Against Dallas, it's not the worst matchup in the world. But the thing is, you have no Ayuk. Kittle, Jennings, and Debo are all currently missing practice on Wednesday. I mean, I'm going to have to figure out what I'm doing in the Flock League because right now Brock Purdy's my starting quarterback. We have Geno Smith out there on the waiver wire in the Flock League. Do I go with Geno or Purdy? I think we have to wait to see the injury updates that you have in San Fran. Tua will be our next guy here at 15 with Tua. I think Tua can come in and yet again be a top 3 to 5 quarterback in passing yards. And I wouldn't bat an eye. But the thing is, the man's never going to run the ball, especially after what we had against this Buffalo game, especially with him coming back. I think his number one priority is just, hey, we're going to stay in the pocket. We're going to play it safe. Same thing, Cousins. You could have the passing volume. You'll have no rushing upside. Dak Prescott will be higher than this in my rest of season ranks. Just specifically, if you were looking at what you have this week, it's a tough matchup against the Niners. And then after this, we have Bo Nix in a really good spot against the Panthers. We have Anthony Richardson, freaking bomb. We have Aaron Rodgers actually in a bounce back spot here. And then Drake May, I know people are going to be super, super excited about. I mean, obviously May back-to-back games with over 20 fantasy points has looked incredible. This is not the matchup you play him. Going up against the Jets, right now sportsbooks are putting the Patriots as a bottom 5-ish offense in the NFL this week in points scored. Not super interested. I'm going over to what we have with the tight end position. George Kittle, it is in his own tier if he is good to go. George Kittle is sitting up here over the past 4 weeks with 4 receiving touchdowns. Over his last 5 games played, he has 5 receiving touchdowns. I mean, the man is looking at just a baseline floor of, I mean, we haven't seen a game with less than 14.5 fantasy points since week 1. So I don't know what else you could be looking for. You have no Brandon Ayuk. You potentially have no Debo. You potentially have no Jennings. So Kittle's going to get everything here in the receiving game. Kittle is the best asset at the tight end position right now, assuming that you don't have him missing with the foot sprain. Now, Brock Bowers will be leading off our next tier. With Bowers, he's actually scored more points than Kittle so far this season. Obviously, he's played more games, but he's also been incredible. I mean, he's averaged 12 targets per game over the past 3 weeks. Now, the fundamental issue that you have is you have an implied team total of 16 points here for this Raiders offense. Sportsbooks are projecting them to be the second worst offense in the NFL, tied with the Carolina Panthers this week. So the touchdown upside may be a little bit limited. Kelsey here at 3. Kelsey and the Chiefs project to be a top 5 offense in the NFL. What is crazy to see is you're looking at Travis Kelsey so far this season, sitting here with 0 touchdowns. Yes. 0 touchdowns off of about 36 targets. Historically speaking, you should expect a touchdown rate hovering around 10% for a player like Kelsey in this kind of offense. So I think you are kind of due here for some positive regression. Hopefully this offense bounces back this week, which is the expectation if you are looking at sportsbooks. McBride will be our next option. It's tough to have McBride ahead of Kelsey or Bowers, just with the lack of overall passing volume that you have from Kyler. Like we discussed, I mean, Kyler has more games with fewer than 200 passing yards than games with more than 200 passing yards. Jake Ferguson will be our next option. I mean, if you are looking at Ferguson over the past month, target volume has been pretty damn consistent. I mean, the man's had 29 targets in the last 4 games. It's really what you are looking for, 7-8 targets a game. It's a decent offense. You have no Brandon Cooks, but it is going to be a pretty damn tough matchup going up against the Niners. Evan Ingram will be our next tight end. I know Evan Ingram had like the letdown spot this past week, falling from 102 receiving yards down to only 35. But ultimately, if you are looking at Evan Ingram, the issue was the Jacksonville Jaguars were just able to run the ball over and over and over again which doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to do that against the Packers. With this, they most likely trail in comparison to what we saw with the New England game. Our next option will be Cade Otton. I mean, if you are looking at Otton, he's already been playing over 90% of the snaps in pretty much every single game so far this season. The issue is you just don't command that many targets when you have Godwin, when you have Evans. But hell, you see the season high, I want to say career high, 100 receiving yards against the Baltimore Ravens. And I think he does push for more volume with no Godwin, with no Evans. And clearly you've had incredible quarterback play from Baker Mayfield. David Njoku will be our next option. With Njoku, two positive catalysts have happened. One, you transition from Deshaun Watson to Jameis Winston. There should probably be some more passing volume in the offense. And two, you have no Amari Cooper. So I think David Njoku slides into a tight end that you are starting every single week. Going down to our next tier, we're going to be looking at Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts has been really consistent for 3 weeks straight now, where you have had double-digit fantasy points. Now, the issue is the touchdowns just haven't been there from Pitts. And where we are looking at a player like Travis Kelce saying, oh, we're probably due for some positive touchdown regression. If you look at what we've had from Kyle Pitts throughout his entire NFL career, the touchdown rate has been incredibly low. So with that in mind, I am probably in a spot in which I think you're excited about Pitts in a full PPR format, not so much in a non-PPR league. Kincaid will be our next name. If you're looking at Kincaid averaging 6.5 targets game over the past month. But now that you have Amari Cooper in, I just think that the ceiling is really gone for Kincaid. I don't see him getting up to 8-9 targets in a great offense. I mean, really, you've had the floor from him all season. The issue is, I mean, the best game you've had is 52 receiving yards. Like, the ceiling's been severely capped. You haven't really had many touchdowns here either. It should be a higher scoring game going up against Seattle, though. Cole Kmet's been incredible. Like, I am starting Kmet over Sam Laporta myself in the Flock League. But also, you look at Kmet, he had 2 receiving touchdowns, scored 24 points this past week. Going back to week 3, he scored 25 points. So we've seen the crazy high ceiling games from Kmet. He's the 3rd tight end in fantasy so far this year. But with that being said as well, you have 4 games with under 10 fantasy points. So like the floor is higher with Pitts, the floor is higher with Kincaid, the ceiling may be a little bit higher with Kmet, but also Kmet's actually probably due for some touchdown regression in the other way. Sam Laporta, Tucker Kraft will be our next 2 players. With Kraft, the issue is, of course, while this is a phenomenal offense, you have Dobbs, you have Reed, you have Watson, you have Wiggs, you have so many receivers grabbing targets. With Laporta, I know a lot of people are wanting to know, oh, how does no Jameson Williams impact him? Jameson Williams is averaging 2.5 targets a game over the past month. Him leaving this offense really has no impact on Laporta. Laporta's already been on the field for pretty much every snap. The issue is Laporta, over the past month, has seen a whopping 9 targets in the last 4 games he's played. I am too emotionally attached at this point to Laporta to cut the dude, but I am benching him for Cole Kmet myself. Mark Andrews, TJ Hawkinson will be our next 2 names. I have no idea if Hawk is going to end up playing or not. That will be something to monitor. With Andrews, I know he's crushed back-to-back weeks now, 15 fantasy points and 20 fantasy points, 3 touchdowns off of the 8 targets over the past 2 weeks. He's in line for some really bad regression here with his touchdown rates. While at the same time going up against Cleveland, they probably just run the ball over and over again. In Hunter Henry, Pat Frymuth will be our next 2 names. Hunter Henry looks a lot better with Drake May under center, but like we said, if you look at sportsbooks, they are really projecting out the Patriots to take a step backwards here. Now, going over to what we have with these defenses, we'll breeze through them. Tier 1, we are going to be going with the Steelers, Broncos, Chiefs, Chargers. If you got them, you start them. If they're on the waiver wire, you pick them up. Steelers, you actually have the lowest implied team total for their opponent in the entire NFL this week with the Giants. The Broncos, just 1 week last week. Hell, I lost to Sal because of them. And they get to play against Bryce Young. The Chiefs are like 9.5 point favorites against the Raiders. The Chargers are going up against the New Orleans Saints with Spencer Rattler. Maybe they're a little bit better because they have Olave back, but still garbage. Our next tier, also great defensive plays. The Jets, the Ravens, the Lions. If you're looking at the Jets here, yes, Drake May's look decent, but Drake May is willing to turn the ball over. And at the same time, the Jets are 7 point favorites. The Ravens are like 9.5-point favorites. I actually picked up the Ravens defense last week, just specifically with the idea to be playing them this week against Jameis and the Browns. And the Detroit Lions had the largest spread of any team in the NFL. Obviously, no Aiden Hutchinson, it is very difficult to project them out to generate the same amount of pressures as you would usually expect. But you have an implied team total of only 17 points for the Titans. Then our next tier will be Chicago going up against Washington with no Jaden Daniels. Houston going up against Anthony Richardson. Hilarious. Then Minnesota, I understand, yes, is the best defense in fantasy so far this season. Minnesota has just been incredible. But with that being said, you are looking at a tough matchup against the Rams with Cooper Kupp back in, where the Rams have an applied team total of almost 23 points, which is much higher than any other opponent that we have on this entire defensive list. The Niners will be our next defense going up against Dallas. Obviously, Dallas just completely collapsed playing the Detroit Lions before the bye, but I would be a little bit concerned that you get a post-bye week bump for Dallas. And then the Packers have had a great defense so far going up against the Jags. The top 12 defenses in these rankings are the defenses that you want to be starting. I think you can rearrange the order however you want, but I do know that these are the defenses you want to go with. If you don't have one of these defenses and for whatever reason, somebody in your league's rostering two, you can look at Miami, New York, the Falcons, or the Bills, but I'm not nearly as excited about it. But I really appreciate you and really hope I was able to help you out with this video. I do want to remind you, I got everybody hooked up. Doesn't matter if you use code FLOCK a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, yesterday, today, or tomorrow with that free Malik Neighbors pick, more than less than half a total yard for the Monday night game. If you're new to Underdog Fantasy with code FLOCK, you'll also get a free Matthew Stafford pick, more than less than half a total yard, plus a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000, plus a free team review that we are doing in the live stream every single night. Just make sure that you set up an account on flockfantasy.com with the same email address as your account on Underdog Fantasy. That way I know to hook up with that free team review voucher. But thank you again. I really appreciate you, and I really hope we get to see you out with the live stream later today.